We are back tonight with Demonology 101. Why should one have the knowledge of Satan? In the previous episodes, we took a look at what Satan is, differentiating from the Westernized paradigm, the Westernized Christian community, the paradigm of the Westernized Christian community, and the paradigm of the ancients. We also took a look at what demons are. Tonight, we're going to follow up on this and add another layer to this foundation that we are creating, considering why the knowledge of Satan, so that you can have more success. Stay tuned. Boom! We are back in the house tonight with Demonology 101, third installment. Why the knowledge of Satan? Why should you have the knowledge of Satan? In the previous episodes, we took a look at what Satan is. That was episode 1. Then we took a look at what demons are. That was episode 2. Tonight, this is the third layer to this series, which is why the knowledge of Satan. We are streaming live on our YouTube channel, which is Anointed Life, Ancient Biblical Spirituality, on our Facebook page, which is the Ancient Biblical Pneumatologist. And I'm also streaming live on my Twitter account. All right. If you are joining us right now, I'm seeing a few persons coming on live. If you are joining us, wherever you're joining us from, leave a comment in the comment section. Let us know. Let us know who you are, what your name is, where you're coming from, so that we can know who is in the house. And as you come into the comment section, please feel free to interface with others in the comment section. All right? We are of the Anointed Life Mentorship International community. You can always find us on nas.io, nas.io/anointed-life-mentorship. Right? Look for us on nas.io, or you can always find us our Facebook group. We have actually transitioned from our Facebook community to nas.io. But if you're on Facebook and you'd like to find us, you can always look for Anointed Life Mentorship INT on Facebook, and even anointed_life or the_anointed_life on Instagram. All right. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time on our YouTube channel, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and make sure that you receive all our notifications so that you know where we are, so that you would be able to actually keep up with the lives that we're doing. So whilst I'm speaking here, I'm actually going to just let persons within our community know that we are on, that we are here, so that nobody is missing out. All right? For those of you who have not seen what is Satan and what are demons, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, Anointed Life. Here we go again. I'm sick. Wrong YouTube channel. Ancient Biblical Spirituality. That's the YouTube channel that you're looking for. Ancient Biblical Spirituality. Look at the last 2 videos where we make a clear differentiation between the Westernized perspective of Satan, where it came from, and what is the biblical understanding of what Satan is, or Satan, as we call it in the Western world. And then we did another episode where we took a look at what is the Westernized understanding of demons, which we saw does not belong in the Bible and actually came from other sources in Israel's history, and how you in particular can actually manage and have authority over these things. So if you have not seen these as yet, please ensure that you go to the YouTube channel and check those out so that you get context to what we're going to be covering here today. All right. So I'm just letting those on our Facebook community know that we are live. And then we get rolling. All right, there we go. So the question is always, why the knowledge of Satan? Why the knowledge of Satan? Now, it's super important to understand that one of the things in particular, one of the it's taken me some time to really speak on the context of Satan and demons. As I said, because in the Western Christian community specifically, we have had a very different definition of what these things are. And in the difference in definition, what has happened is that we basically have found ourselves in spaces where we have ended up in the Western Christian culture. We found ourselves in spaces where we have begun to create one form of picture of Satan and what demons are, and our understanding of this thing. We began to form a picture that actually caused us to suffer, right? Based on our understanding of spiritual dynamics, scriptures, and so on. It is very easy, very, very, very easy to actually formulate pictures that can cause self-infliction. And that's because in the Western Christian community, we are not aware of the fact that the Bible, the very Bible, the ancient understanding of the Garden of Eden, pretty much teaches that what your truth is, you are communicating to the creation. And whatever you believe, it is not in the Western Christian community, you are taught that you need to do certain things to be validated before God. The context of the New Testament is to communicate that you have been validated, and what you believe, you are in the position of authority energetically on that frequency, on the highest frequency. And whatever you believe, you're communicating to the creation, and the creation pretty much reveals to you what your what you believe to be true to you. All right. So the creation is actually revealing to you what you believe about it, and therefore it is behaving according to what you have given it, or you have filled it with, what you have filled the creation with mentally, because you communicate spirit to spirit. What you fill it with mentally is what it is actually doing. So this live here in particular is not about it is not going to be about battling Satan and fighting Satan. These are perspectives that belong to the Western Christian community, which is the community that pretty much communicates that Satan is this external entity that you are trying to beat. This external entity that you yourself are trying to be more powerful than. And in your attempt to be more powerful than it, what ends up taking place is that instead of ruling over what you're supposed to rule over, we very, very, very easily find ourselves ensnared. When I say ensnared, I mean you find yourself in a wicked loop where instead of ruling over the darkness, or ruling over that which is Satan, we find ourselves seeking validation from what we are trying to rule over. And how are you seeking validation? Where you find yourself in a position where you are trying to assert authority over that which you have been given authority over. Does that make sense, everybody? You're trying to assert authority over that which you have been given authority over. All right? Now, if that is the case, this is not that life. Our research at the Institute has actually proven that that is not necessary, and that authority that has to assert itself is in fact no authority. Authority that has to assert himself is actually someone who is trying to find his authority, or trying to prove that he has authority, or someone who has no authority at all and trying to verify by the behavior of the creation whether or not they have authority. Right? I'm just making one more post here. to our community so that everybody knows that we are live. All right, so here we go. There we go. All right, now in this context, what we want to speak about here, I'm going to actually give you 4 to 5 reasons. Let's say maximum 5 that I'm going to give you as to why the knowledge of Satan is important. The first thing is that the garden in particular is the separation of light and darkness. Right? Point number 1. The Garden of Eden in particular is the separation of light from darkness. The purpose of light is to separate darkness. And in the context of the scripture, Psalm 1, which is a psalm that resonates with the theme of the Garden of Eden, actually communicates. If you put Psalm 1 and the Garden of Eden together, Psalm 1 in particular indicates that the person who delights in the law of the Lord meditates on it day and night. And in the previous videos, we said that day and night, and we identified that day and night is not necessarily and not limited to times of day. But day and night is also a hint in the garden interpretation of the scriptures, the ancient Israelite method of interpretation of scripture. Day and night is a hint to the definitions of what day and night is in Genesis chapter 1. And that is that it is meditating on light and darkness. Without meditating on light and darkness, you have no understanding. All right? Which means if we put Genesis chapter 1 and 2 together with Psalm 1 that resonate the garden realities, even with regards to Psalm 8 that also resonates at different aspects of the garden reality, the presence of light in particular, which is the spirit of Elohim, the presence of that light means the separation of light from darkness. And that means that Psalm 1 is communicating to you that it is the responsibility of the priest to have an understanding as to what light is and to what darkness is. That means for understanding to be, there must be definition. Which means one must be able to define the darkness well and the light. And therefore, that meditation is actually what helps you to stay in the light. In the absence of the knowledge of the darkness, one does not know what light is in its fullness. You may have an idea, but your lack of understanding as to what darkness is means that you can very, very subtly flow into darkness. And because you have no knowledge of it, you would unknowingly label the darkness that you might be stepping into as light, and then very, very soon after that, you begin to see something different expressing itself. According to the law of the Garden of Eden, every spirit reproduces after his own kind. Which means you step into a different spirit, because if light is a spirit, darkness is also a spirit. There is no void in the spiritual realm. And if there is no void in the spiritual realm, then the knowledge of what is light and what is darkness helps one to know how to stay in the light. The absence of the knowledge of the darkness means that you can very easily switch into a different spirit, labeling it light in ignorance, and then that darkness begins to reproduce after its own kind, and you begin to experience from mental health issues to physical health issues and even death. This is making sense. Again, for those of you joining us, joining us for this live, please feel free to comment in the comment section. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from, so that we know who is here. And feel free to begin to share with others in the comment section, interface with others in the comment section, interface with the community, and get to know someone else who is of like mind. And within our community, you might very well find your next best friend in the name on these lives, or be commenting right next to them. All right, so coming back to point number 1. Point number 1 is that Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and Psalm 1 go hand in hand And therefore, it actually points out that for one to remain in the light, one must have knowledge of the darkness. The context of the scripture also communicates in comparing the man in the garden and Yeshua, who is now the man who is now identified as the first and the last. It actually indicates that the reason why man fell from the garden in Genesis chapter 1 is because of youth, a lack of knowledge of the darkness. This is actually seen where the serpent in particular presents a dynamic that is a dynamic that introduces darkness, and there was no identification of it because there was a lack of knowledge of darkness. The narrative, the Bible in particular, communicates and alludes to the fact that darkness here, that the absence of the knowledge of the darkness was actually what caused the man and the woman to make the decisions that they made. This is why in the New Covenant, Yeshua is actually identified as a full-grown son. His knowledge of the darkness helps him to make decisions to remain in the light and to never be moved from the light, because he has an awareness of what light is and what darkness is. In addition to this brings me to point number 2. So point number 1 is the garden narrative in particular highlights that light and darkness has been separated, and therefore one must have definition of the two to be able to understand that separation. Number 2, there are many, even before I start to get into that, before I get into who have actually referred to these things in the scriptures, number 2 is this. In the context of the scriptures, the garden narrative pretty much begins with this separation of light and darkness, which means the garden is the garden of light. All darkness, therefore, is found to be outside of the garden, which means that the fullness of the garden narrative includes understanding where darkness resides in the garden narrative. If we read the prophet Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 45 or 43, maybe one of those chapters, it pretty much communicates that God is the one. He says that he created the darkness. And this is something that baffles the mindset of the Western Christian. Because the Western Christian in particular has been taught the idea of the definitions of good and evil according to Western philosophical thinking, light is seen as inherently good and darkness is seen as inherently evil. Because these concepts exist in the literature, or sorry, not in the literature, in the mindset of the average Westerner, it is very easy for the average Westerner to think that God is light and therefore, and there's no darkness in him. And because he is light, all we need to do is to be aware of light. And the problem with that is when one encounters darkness, well, let me leave that for another thing. And the problem with that in the garden is that being aware of light alone as inherent goodness, which is not the definition given in the text. The definition of light in the text is the Spirit of God, which is the Spirit of Elohim. And that is the spirit of an authoritative one. Right? Light, therefore, is the spirit of the authoritative one and the pathway of the authoritative one. Darkness, therefore, would be the opposite of that, which is the spirit of someone who is not functioning from authority. An authority defines. The person who is not an authority accepts a definition. Now, because this is not understood in Western culture, we it's very easy for the Westerner to actually just grasp the fact that God is light and all I need is to maintain the knowledge of the light. In doing this, what you have done is actually embraced a fraction of the garden. And therefore, the rest of the garden, the rest of the understanding of the garden, which is what the garden separates and what is outside of the garden, that the man inside of the garden is also told to rule over. And he is also told to rule over in the garden, he's told to subdue it. And outside of the garden, he's also told the priest is also told to rule over the enemies. This narrative is actually seen in the Bible, where you see, for example, the garden is the garden of light, and darkness is outside of the garden. Therefore, this is reflected in the rest of the scriptures, where Israel is seen as the nation of the garden, and they are at war with the uncircumcised, which will be those outside of the garden. When you see circumcised in the Bible, circumcised refers to those of the garden people, and the uncircumcised would be those outside of the garden, which is those in the darkness. Which means that paralleling the first garden with Israel being the garden nation, because the covenants are designed to bring you back into the garden, which is why your sacrifices are being done. The sacrifices are what you need to remove from your consciousness, from your mind and heart, to be able to return to the garden. So in paralleling the garden, the construct of the garden in Genesis 1 and 2, and the construct of the physical model of the garden, where Israel is seen as the garden nation, interfacing with the darkness outside of the garden, the uncircumcised, is further paralleled, where you see Yeshua, who has resurrected humanity. He has a New Jerusalem in them, and the darkness again is outside of the garden. It is outside of the New Jerusalem, and the priests are told to rule and to reign. To rule and to reign means that they have to actually rule over the darkness, rule over the creation, and also rule over the darkness. Just like the Israel in particular was seen as ruling over, they were supposed to rule over the darkness. My second point here is where one is actually not taking the darkness into consideration. As the scripture itself says, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you are functioning from a fraction of the equation. And therefore, there are things that you are not ruling over. That brings me to point number 3. What you are not ruling over, what you have not defined to be able to rule over, is going to rule over you. Now, many of us in particular in the Western Christian community have actually found ourselves in spaces. We've actually found ourselves in spaces. Again, I'm inviting those who are joining us on our social media to please comment. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, well, what is now X, please leave a comment, leave your name, your location, let us know where you're coming from so that we know who is here. And feel free to interface with others in the comment section. So my third point is what is not ruling over you. What you are not ruling over, what you have not defined to be able to rule over, is going to rule over you. Right? And this is actually what is seen in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 3. Because of the youth of the man in the garden, he doesn't actually have an understanding of the darkness, and therefore not having an understanding and a clear differentiation, like that Yeshua, who is identified as the first and the light, he has a clear understanding, a clear differentiation to be able to rule over it. Just as them in the garden, what you're going to do is to actually make you can experience the effects or reproduction after your own kind by you yourself shifting into perspectives that, because you have not defined, may be assumed to fall under the definition of light. And then that begins to reproduce after its own kind and is ruling over you. That brings me to point number 4. Many in particular in the new, for those in particular who have actually left denominational Christianity and functioning by the pendulum effect, as we spoke about in the previous lives, in the previous episodes of this series, where you've heard about Satan, whether you're from the denominational community or you were not from the denominational community. But whether you were from or not from, your knowledge of what Satan is came from the denominational community. There are many people who are not in the denominational community, who have come from outside of the denominational community, but they've heard about Satan from the denominational community. I'm putting the two of them into the same category here. If you have, in any form or fashion, gained knowledge of Satan, what most people tend to do is actually they function with what you call the pendulum effect, which is they move from that and they swing across to the other side on the other extreme, where they are attempting to invalidate the idea of Satan. And because of the oppression that it has caused, it creates somewhat of a visceral response for them. And they are trying to invalidate Satan and invalidate what the scriptures clearly define. One of the things in particular that results in is because of the attempt to invalidate it. When what you invalidate, as I said, you don't know how to differentiate, and when you step into it, usually persons like that end up in very long battles. Because in point number 4, I mentioned in the previous sessions that I would mention that there are 2 ways to get rid of spirits, those Satan, demons, and even sicknesses and diseases that are expressions of these things. And that involves mental health issues as well. As I mentioned in the previous sessions, the previous episodes, the garden law is that everything is reproducing after its own kind. Therefore, what you are experiencing, whether it's sickness, mental health issues, by scriptural standard, is a reproduction after the kind of something. Whatever your reference point is, you become the image and likeness of it, and then that begins to reproduce after its own kind, even on the body. It can also reproduce after its own kind in different aspects of your life. This does not mean that you are possessed. It simply means that you, with your lack of understanding of what Satan is and how that works, you can very easily fall into it. And then you see things begin to happen, whether your body begins to experience challenges, mental health issues in your home, in your relationships, in your marriage, in your finances, in your affairs, your general affairs. These things are being reproduced after its kind. Now, even though many persons in particular may try to invalidate that and just say, well, let's just live in the light, the lack of awareness and lack of defining of that means that you slip into it. You don't know you're just slipping into it, and then you cannot in any form or fashion be responsible for what is taking place. Now, there are 2 ways in particular that the scriptures actually indicate that one can get rid of what we would call spirits, what we would call Satan and demons, and the expressions of the presence of these things. One is the renewal of the mind. Since the Bible actually communicates that every thought comes from a spirit, and what thought is and what leaves are to a tree, thoughts are to a spirit. It therefore means that if one begins to renew their mind, um, renewal of mind means change of spirit. Now, even though this is effective, the problem is if one in particular tries to invalidate the awareness or invalidate what Satan and demons are, that means that one is never going to be able to take the responsibility to rule over it. It is present and it will remain present until you have fully renewed your mind. And that means that if it takes 6 months for you to fully renew your mind, you are living with the enemy. You are living with something that is reproducing after its own kind until you have sufficiently renewed your mind to not experience that anymore. That means for every area where your mind is not renewed, you are functioning by the thoughts of that entity and you are confirming its presence. In this case, you are in an unnecessary battle, and an unnecessary battle that can become very unpleasant, and in some cases it can become unpleasant very quickly. The knowledge of the light and the darkness, it is actually what stops this. What do I mean by that? It simply means that when one is able to identify what darkness is and understand that that darkness is also spirit and it must be ruled over. In many cases, I have seen even in scripture, as well as in my personal experience, that when the Satan, or what we call devils, are addressed and dismissed, a lot of times that actually cuts off, very frequently it cuts off the expression of that spirit, meaning it cuts off the source of the expression, making it easier for the believer to step into mind renewal without the hassle of a battle. Does this make sense, everybody listening? Let me say that again. Where there is no knowledge, the presence of that thing that is reproducing after its own kind, the presence of the Satan, or what you have reproduced, to what you're actually referring to as devils or demons, by your own external reference points, the presence of that is reproducing after its own kind. And even though mind renewal brings deliverance from these things, it's no longer present. Even though mind renewal brings deliverance to these things, it is very commonly your battle can be extended as long as your mind renewal takes. Whereas if the second way of removing that from you is to simply address it and rule over it, which means you instruct it to leave from the person of Christ. Once this is actually instructed, it leaves immediately, and now the manual process can take place with peace. There are many cases that I've seen where persons in particular actually go through a long and agonizing process because of perceptions that what is going on in the body is not related to what the Bible says is related to. And therefore, they find themselves in very, very difficult situations because they're trying to renew the mind. And as long as there's unrenewed aspects of your mind, that is actually from that particular spirit, that particular principle that spirit is working with, you are confirming the presence, and therefore your mind renewal, there's a battle between your mind renewal and this. And this is not only with regards to the expression of sickness and mental health issues. Every spirit that one reproduces after the kind of the external reference point is also something that you're using as a mindset, which means that your mind renewal also comes with resistance, where you're always battling thoughts that are bombarding you. And it's because, again, in most cases, those persons who are interfacing with that they are not addressing or not, they may be one of those persons that, in the pendulum effect, going to the other side of the spectrum, where they are constantly dealing with bombarding thoughts in their mind renewal. And that is an unnecessary battle. In some cases, persons could drag that out for months. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. Instead of ruling over it, the scriptures actually show that when Yeshua healed, which brings me to point number 5. If you look at the scriptures in particular, you see in point number 5, what I'm saying in my 5th point here, point number 5 is if you do a search for healing or devils in the New Testament, you'll notice that healing and casting out of devils go hand in hand. They are literally paralleled. And in the understanding of this in the garden and ruling over these things, you'll notice that very frequently when Yeshua heals, it is paralleled with devils being cast out, casting out the devils. Even when the disciples are told to go heal the sick, it's very commonly paralleled healing the sick with the casting out of devils. This happens before the cross, and this happens after the cross. You notice that when cloth was put on Paul's body and put on others who were sick, it says that the devils left. And that falls into the same line of thought, which is the line of thought that you notice that people receive immediate relief from Yeshua when he tells the devil to leave. There's immediate relief. This is not only related to demon possession, we're speaking about sickness on the body. That there's immediate relief. Why? Because the source of the expression is removed. And then he tells them, go and sin no more. In the context of the God narrative, what that means is go and do not use external reference points as your source of wisdom anymore. Go back to the name and the thoughts of the name. In that way, you notice that the persons have been healed and they can go through a mind renewal process in discipleship without suffering. The opposite happens where one decides to just learn a fraction of the garden. Remember that the garden separates light from darkness, which means even understanding the darkness outside of the garden is part of the full knowledge of the garden. Because even Yahweh says that he created the darkness, which means it is categorized, it is put into its correct order, and therefore it must be understood as part of the entire garden narrative. In saying that, I'm saying all of that to say that, again, we come down to 2 ways of getting rid of sicknesses, diseases, and infirmities, mental health issues, and even possession, the demonic influence, possession, all of these things fall under the same category in the scriptures, which is the expression of what we call Satan or spirit, the things that we are clothing ourselves with. One, you can get rid of it by mind renewal. Mind renewal will get rid of it. But that also means that as long as it takes for your mind to be properly renewed, whichever aspects of your still unrenewed mind is agreeing with the mindset that this spirit has, confirms it. And therefore, your battle is as long as your mind renewal takes place. Or, on the other hand, you understand what the Satan is so that you can make decisions to come out of that mindset or identify with Yeshua and instruct it to leave. In that way, there is usually immediate relief, and therefore mind renewal can take place without unnecessary, unfavorable experiences. All right. So these are actually the five reasons that I'm actually saying that, starting with the fact that darkness comes with the God narrative, meaning that it's light separate the light from the darkness, and the darkness is understood to be outside of the God. the in addition to the fact that New Testament authors, New Testament literature, both in the Gospels and post-cross in the book of Acts, speaks about these things. Even in New Jerusalem, identifies that the darkness is outside of the New Jerusalem. And for one to be in the light, one must be in Yeshua. And to understand how to remain in Yeshua without compromise, the understanding of darkness must be clear. Now, this in no form or fashion, these 5 points means in no form or fashion that one should live a life where you are constantly aware of the darkness. What you rule over, you are not living in awareness of. When you encounter it, you apply rulership over it. What you live in constant awareness of is your Elohim, which is Yahweh, and the thoughts of Yahweh. If you're living in thoughts of Yahweh, then the only way for you to learn how to remain there without compromise also requires that you have an understanding as to what Satan is, what the darkness is, so that you can live there and be certain that you're always there and you're not veering off into something that you're not aware of and end up with unnecessary struggles that you could have pretty much saved yourself from. All right? So again, light and darkness it's all part of the fullness of the scriptures, and therefore it must be meditated upon. What you live from is your spirit, which is spirit of light. But that does not negate the fact that you should not have awareness and definition and understanding of what the darkness is, not only to live there, not only to live in the New Jerusalem, and to remain in the New Jerusalem in confidence and in peace, but also to be able to rule over it when you encounter it. All right? So this is basically why the knowledge of Satan is necessary as a son of God, as a priest of Yeshua. Wisdom can only be wisdom when you have the knowledge of that which is good and that which is evil. Which is good in the Bible is that which is functional, that which is evil is that which is dysfunctional. And whether you are actually functioning from the knowledge of that which is good or evil, you are actually functioning from a source of wisdom that is reproducing spirit. So in essence, to actually try to negate the fact that darkness does not exist, or to treat it as though it is not something I need to pay attention to, is actually disadvantageous to the priest. Not only disadvantageous because they will not know how to make decisions over nations. They will not know how to make decisions over the creation. But it's also going to compromise their ability to be certain that they're living in the light and actually remain away and know where the line is with regards to darkness, and ensuring that they're not living from a different spirit that is reproducing anybody and not living from Yahweh. All right? So this brings us, I think that this is actually a sufficient exposition of these 5 points. If you have any questions concerning these 5 points, please feel free to leave it in the comment section. We will get back to you as soon as we can. And for those of you who are hearing this for the first time, I encourage you to revisit this video so that you can understand what we're speaking about, and with clarity you can move forward and be more efficient in your ministry as a priest and more efficient in your mind renewal process and in your walk in the light. All right? This is Zane Pear from Anointed Life Mentorship International. If you would like to pretty much learn more along the lines of what we're speaking about, find us on Facebook at Anointed Life Mentorship INT, or nas.io, nas.io, anointed /anointed life mentorship. Right? Join our independent community for more information, and you can even ask the questions that you'd like to ask there and have responses via video. All right? Or you can find all of those links for our communities at internationalinstituteofpneumatology.com. internationalinstituteofpneumatology.com. Remember, we meditate on the word of Yahweh, day and night. Meditate on the light and the darkness for wisdom and power. Boom. Blessings and much love. See you in the next life. Yeshua.